You're both farmers, and I think you both would agree that today's farmers do a better job of protecting against soil erosion and the movement of fertilizer and chemicals and pesticides into the waterways than did previous generations. But I think you both agree that more needs to be done. What would you do as Secretary of Agriculture to minimize soil erosion and contamination of waterways?
First?
Yes, Frank.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. You're right that we are doing better in some regards with our crop production for soil erosion. The other thing is, though, that we put more and more land into annual row cropping. And so over the years, we put more and more pressure on the erosion because we've taken land out of perennial cropping systems. One thing I would like to do is see more cover crops in the landscape, more perennial crops in rotation. And one way we can do that is to create the next generation of biofuels that would use perennial crops. So if we could use, for example, prairie grasses, switchgrass, other high-yielding perennial crops, then the landscape land would be much more covered and prevented from erosion, protected from leaching of nutrients. Studies at the University of Minnesota show that perennial crops will leach 30 times less nitrate than row crops. And so we can make tremendous progress by switching to more perennial crops in the landscape. And there are some exciting new developments coming on in biofuels production that would allow to make biofuels at a more local scale. And three things are important about it. It could be small, local scale, and farmer-owned, so the profits go in the pockets of farmers. Secondly, it would be produce fuel for agriculture. Now our biofuels mostly produce fuel for cars going down the highway. We need to secure the energy future for agriculture. And thirdly, if we could have more perennial crops in the landscape, it'd be more sustainable and more resilient in the landscape.
Farmers are doing a better job, and certainly the state is part of that, and the Department of Agriculture is a great role in providing some of the resources to be able to help producers do a good job. We provide about $7 million a year from the state legislature in cost share dollars, where for farmers who will pay half the cost of putting that practice on the ground, and the state will pay the other half. We also have technicians that then help design those practices out there. One of the things that's happened with the budget cuts is while we still have dollars for those practices, we don't have as many people in those offices out there, and we are really getting stretched thin in some of the areas. So we have now about 21. Normally we have 100 soil secretaries in our 100 offices, or 99 plus 2 in Potawatomi. And so we have 100 soil secretaries normally. We're down to 79 soil secretaries. We've lost technicians as well. We've lost about 8 technicians in the last couple of years. Years ago, we had over 70 technicians. Now we have under 40 technicians. And so we've lost the ability to put some of those, design some of those practices and get them on the ground. I think we need to reinvest more and be able to get some more of that on the ground. I also think that farmers are doing a good job, and we need to be able to encourage them. Another time we'll talk a little bit about Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, wetlands as well, and I think those are a good tool that we've really ramped up in the last 4 years as well.
30-second response, Francis.
Well, I think that we also have to keep in mind that with the increasing severity of rainfall, we've certainly seen a lot more of that. 2 years ago, when we had the big floods in eastern Iowa, we saw 10% of Iowa's cropland eroded at rates of 20 ton per acre or more in that one event. And even the annual erosion rate is about 5 tons per acre. And recent science shows that the annual rejuvenation rate of soil is about a half a ton per acre per year. And so we're not sustainable, and we do need to get more perennial crops on the landscape to increase that sustainability.
Now let me just mention Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program wetlands. These are wetlands that are constructed at the bottom of tile lines, generally up in this area of the state, kind of the north central Iowa area, looking to reduce the amount of nitrogen coming from that tile line water. And those Conservation Reserve Enhancement wetlands, nutrient reduction wetlands, reduce the amount of nitrogen coming from that water by 40 to 70%, a huge reduction. It's been recognized by folks in the Gulf as well as in Washington, D.C. as a innovative program that they want to fund more of and want to see more on the ground. So I think we've been very proactive in going after some of those things, as well as the opportunities that we have in other areas to reduce nutrient losses as well.
And Steve's question will be to Bill first.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being a part of our forum here today. When it comes to the day that we're at currently, September 11th, 9/11, bringing back a lot of very solemn memories for a lot of people, obviously, today. There seems to be, concern over agri-terrorism and the fact that this is something that may be overlooked in many instances. What do each of you feel can be done to help keep us secure in rural America, to help keep these these very vital interests secure?
The department do some agri-security work. We certainly have some folks out as we have inspectors out in the field to look for pieces and encourage those folks in businesses across the state to have a little more protection. It is pretty tough. In Iowa agriculture, we're very open. Access to our farms generally is very open. If somebody decided to do something bad, there are those things that could happen out there, and that's been a concern. There have been a handful of small cases out there, just seemingly not about large issues, but about small issues, even neighbor issues, those kinds of things. But in general, we have been very, very fortunate to not have those additional problems. We do as well some tabletop exercises where we go through and look at the concerns about what would happen if we had a foreign animal disease, what would happen if we had other kinds of leaks of some of our chemicals or pesticides out there. How would we react? Do we have a chance? Does everybody have each other's phone number? Do we know who's in charge of the different pieces? So we go through those from time to time as well to be able to look through the pieces, and then encouraging producers and all our partners out there in agribusiness to be able to make sure that their stuff is locked up and safe, and that they know where things are and they have protection around those things.
We can take a lot of the precautionary measures, and Bill certainly mentioned some good ones that we need to do to be alert for bioterrorism. But I think this also spills over into things like the contamination incident that we had. And with our large growing production in agriculture, production, processing, and distribution system, what happens is that an isolated contamination incident, whether from terrorism or from, like in this case with salmonella, it suddenly can become multiplied exponentially as it moves through the production and distribution and processing system. And so that means that we need to be more vigilant for this kind of large-scale production systems. And one good example is meat processing, where in hamburger production, scraps of meat come from all over the country, or even from foreign countries, and get put together in one batch. And if there's an isolated contamination incident somewhere, suddenly that becomes a national problem. Whereas if locally produced food, an isolated contamination incident is controlled locally. So that's a value for us to grow more of our local food production to the extent we can. And also, grocery stores only have about 3 days worth of food in the store. And so that's a reason why we should look to see how we can become more self-sufficient with local production, because about 90% of the food we eat in Iowa comes from out of state. And so if we can produce more locally, we can be more food secure in the future too.
You know, I think one other piece that certainly people feel in this time as they think about today and they think about what it was like 9 years ago is that sense of controlling their own destiny to some extent. And certainly that brings us back to some discussion around renewable fuels as well, and being able to provide some of our fuels here out of the Midwest, out of the United States, and be more fuel efficient. So I think that's something Iowa has done very, very well. We need to promote, and we also need to be able to talk about the domestic piece of that, not only economically, but about how that offers some resistance to those in other places where right now we're sending lots and lots of dollars, and sometimes they have ill thoughts against us.
Yes, 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I would agree with Bill that we need to look at how we can make agriculture more energy self-sufficient. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe we'll have time later to talk more about it, but there is technology coming down the line that's ready to go, that we could produce fuel at a farm level or a community level to power agriculture. And that is real security, because oil economists tell us that prices are going to be going up and down like this. With $147 a barrel a couple of years ago, they say next time it might be $200 a barrel. But we're not making fuel for agriculture. We're making fuel for cars going down the highway. So we need to secure the energy future for agriculture here in Iowa.